Yeah, just on that actually, I mean, you just talked about the flaws in data in terms of identifying future capacity. Is it a specification for all the new rolling stock that they will have automatic counting, such as the infrared sensors?
Virtually every new train, a newly built train, comes with that, because everybody can see that that's the case. Within the...
So it's not a specification?
I'm sorry?
It's not a specification from yourselves?
I'm not sure whether I specify that if it's a new train, it should have automatic passenger count. Could I let you know? The reality is that it has got automatic passenger counts.
Well, I mean,
that's
should it
how new
not?
trains
I guess what I'm driving at, should it not be a specification? I mean, what the report says is there's problems with relying on ticket prices. It tends to overestimate journeys from cities as opposed to rural stations, such as in my constituency. And actually, the thing you really want to count is who gets on and off the train.
Yeah.
It strikes me you're in the process of buying a whole load of new trains. Would you not require as a specification for those new trains to have this facility?
I understand. I'm only making the simple point that I'm not sure that the market for new trains will ever deliver one without one. I'll go back and check.
And let us know.
Whether that's the case.
Also, you said virtually every train. I mean,
well, that's just because I don't want to say I absolutely know that every new train is like it. But can I come back to you? I think it is the case that new trains that form part of the 900 that we have plans for will all come with automatic passenger count. That's the only way in which we've got it up to 39%. Be clear, I don't want to mislead you, within that 950 trains for which we have plans, some of them are reusing stock which is already, as it were, spare elsewhere, so they are not of themselves new trains.
And you're not going to retrofit them?
Well, the cost of retrofitting some of that is quite high.
But high relative to the, you're talking about a £9.2 billion programme. It seemed to me, reading it, I thought, for goodness sake, get the proper data so that you make proper decisions.
Yeah.
I don't know what is high.
That's exactly what I thought when I read that sentence too. It's conceivable that actually, if I try to ask roughly what sort of price are we talking about here, and by the time you multiply it up across all the carriages we haven't got, I think you could be easily talking about many tens of millions of pounds worth of cost.
But still, relative to 9.2 billion, it may be an appropriate investment.
It may do, but if, for example, with 40% of the carriages, which by the way is increasing as I buy new ones, I get a very substantial coverage of passengers, I may not get huge value out of that marginal 60. I think it's an entirely fair question, and actually it's one that we need to think about. But right now, moving from having sort of 3% of the data to somewhere well north of 40% will fundamentally transform my knowledge. And the question you should ask me then is actually, well, if I were to retrofit all the rest, would I be getting further and better particulars? I might do. I'm very happy to take it away and think about it.
Well, a related issue as well is, I mean, the report says, highlights problems with your modelling. And on page 17 says, you do not test the sensitivity of your forecast to variations in the relationship between economic growth and rail demand.
Yeah.
Why don't you do that?
Well, if I'm honest, I thought paragraphs 115 and 16 were, they're accurate, but I'm not sure if you're actually running a model that's trying to get you to some strategic conclusions. They leave you with the impression that somehow we've not done the right thing. On the question of the relationship between passengers and GDP, as a matter of arithmetic, that's exactly the same as making bigger assumptions about GDP.
It's more than that, surely. Because I remember Ian Coucher saying to me that the average time that a commuter was prepared to spend on the rail element of their commute 10 years ago was around 45 minutes. And it's now an hour and a quarter, and I don't know if that's correct. That's what he said to me. And that's very relevant to my constituency because we're less than 100 miles from London, so it brings us into play. And yet the new Thameslink trains are stopping at Cambridge. So we've got a bizarre situation that those new trains stop there, and yet those new trains have the selected door opening that actually allows them to stop at the rural stations that have got short platforms, which many of the existing trains can't. But your modelling isn't picking up the increasing demand in the county with the highest growing population, where there is increasing demand in Cambridgeshire to use stations such as Littleport, because your modelling is overestimating the city transport. And at the same time, you're saying, but we just look at it from a GDP point of view. You're not looking at it in the round.
No, so I'm making two separate points. If I take a sensitivity analysis that says, here's my base case, what happens if GDP is lower or higher, I've effectively doing something to demand, and I can see how that drops through the bottom. Broadly speaking, if I change the relationship between a given GDP that I started with and passenger numbers, I'm also dropping it through to demand. So both of those variables are effectively being tested if I test a wide range of GDP. That's all I'm saying. The second thing I just want to say is actually the model that we've got, which the NEO at least gives me is based on established building blocks and is new, as well as new and innovative work. If I told you that this model has to run all through the night to give me one answer because the rail system is so complex and actually the level of sophistication in it requires that much computation, you might understand why it is that I have to be sort of moderately cautious about how many variants I can test, because even now the computational requirement to actually allocate as many people as possible to the right routes and get some answers out is quite difficult to do. So I'm absolutely up for being encouraged to do better every year, and that's what we are doing. But the sorts of things that are being talked about here are, in my judgment, the sorts of simplifications which go with the model that nonetheless can actually generate some answers with which you can then affect policy.
Jump in. In my constituency,